welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am joined by the author of a fascinating and thrilling duology. I am so excited to discuss it, so let's hop right into it. Welcome to the show. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Claire Isenthal. The Rising Order is my debut thriller. And then I just recently, toward the end of April, released The New Order, which was the second book in the duology to finish the series. So it's been a wild ride these past 8, 9 years that I've been working on these books. And I feel very emotional to close this chapter, and move on to another one, of course. Always new chapters.
Now, when you're writing a book, you have to spend so much time with the world you've created and the characters that I imagine it must be kind of hard to, move on and have to consider all new characters from scratch.
Yes, exactly. Especially because the joy of writing a series is you get to know, like you said, your characters so much more intimately. And I personally really loved playing with the character arcs and the ability. You just have a lot more runway to do that when you're writing a series, and you have a lot more time, which the character can really kind of show themselves and develop. So I've really enjoyed that, and my next project will be a standalone. So that's going to be an interesting challenge for me as someone who's kind of used to having more time to do that.
Oh, interesting. Well, I'm going to ask
Yeah.
you about that later.
Yeah.
But for now, I'd love to know what the inception point for this duology was. Was it a particular character or an inciting event or perhaps just a mood? Where did it grow from?
I would say the inciting event would have to be just the state of the world that we lived in at the time that I started to write it. It's only kind of grown more amplified, as I think we would all agree, with just the level of violence that's so prevalent in our society, to the extent where I just feel like we're constantly bombarded with it and have almost grown kind of numb to it. And so, writing this and starting the Rising Order about 7 years ago now at this point, maybe even more. It was like 2017, 18. It's interesting to kind of see how our world has evolved since then. So I would say that was definitely the starting point where I kind of started to question what is it that is motivating these individuals to commit these acts of violence. Not like, okay, this is happening again and again, but why? The why behind it. And then that is how the concept of the story was born.
Interesting. So, a
Yeah.
little bit about that story, if that's okay. Let's talk about it through the lens of Flynn, our protagonist. Can you talk a little bit about shaping her as a character, and then perhaps a little bit about her arc in that story, so that we can lead into the second book. Yeah.
Yes. That's a great question. Flynn is, when I created Flynn, my main goal was to put a very ordinary person in an extraordinary circumstance because I wanted readers to put themselves in her shoes to kind of ask, what would I do in this situation? My goal when writing characters is never to make a reader like them or dislike them. My goal is to make readers think about things differently through that character's lens. And so her arc is something that I really love how it leads into the second book and how it transforms. Because at the end of the first book, I think a lot of readers are kind of banging their head against the wall and very frustrated. I'm trying to use my words carefully because I don't want to reveal too much, because the first book actually ends on quite a cliffhanger, which I didn't realize was so controversial, but it is. A lot of people were very upset by that. Not upset, but like, are you kidding? The events that happens at the very end of the first book is really critical turning point for Flynn. And I can't really talk too much about that without it spoiling the event, but people who actually read it will very much understand what I'm talking about. And so she's very empowered by what happens in an interesting way at the end of the first book.
I think what you were just talking about leads very nicely into my next question, which is sort of
Yes.
about like the let's say like it does lead into nicely like the series its philosophical elements, I think, because Flynn and our other main character Wolf, you go between their perspectives and they actually spend a lot of time like engaged in talking about like the reasons that they do things and
Yeah.
the influences behind their ideas. So I'd love if you could talk a little bit about, let's say, building Reds, like the terrorist
Mhm.
group at the center of these books, and
Yeah.
how your philosophical questions and ideas sort of play into that.
Oh, yes. That's a very interesting question. When I built Reds, it was very important for me to ensure that I did it authentically. And so that was why I did go so in depth with like their initiation process. Not only their initiation, but then their induction and then their manifesto. So you really got insight into the psychology of the psychology and the group think both hand in hand together of that organization. I did a lot of research and actually interviewed an ex neo Nazi skinhead to validate Wolf as a character and ensure that I was portraying him accurately and correctly. And the biggest takeaway in psychology that I want readers to get from Reds is that it doesn't really matter what the organization stands for or what it does or what it means or what that manifesto is. What matters is the feeling and the sense of belonging that the members feel from it and the sense of power that they feel from it. And that was what I think was why it was so important to me that Reds also targeted these very lone, isolated individuals who are ostracized. And that's a big problem, that we're seeing today. And I think a big reason why we're facing this, male dilemma and this toxic masculinity. So I don't know. Again, I keep on kind of coming back to because it's something that kind of resonates with me strongly is when I started the book, like where we are now in the world. It's just pretty crazy to see how these themes are only becoming more important.
I can't imagine writing these books over such a long period, enmeshed in these ideas and
Yeah.
trying to understand these groups and then seeing the world just change so rapidly as
Yeah.
in the process of it. That point that you made about the sense of belonging being
Mhm.
more important than any ideas is such a
Mhm.
good point. And I think like it actually it helps things make more sense for me because
Yeah.
like sometimes when you look at the ideas that these groups or these individuals hold, you're like, these don't make sense.
Yeah.
They contradict each other in places, or like they're not
Yeah.
engaging with like this part of reality in any kind of real way. And
Correct.
to think about like it's not really about that. It is about like the feeling they get from being in the group, like makes a ton of sense.
Exactly. Exactly. And again, when I interviewed the ex neo-Nazi skinhead, that was very much the core of what his message was that like that that feeling was what drove all of their decisions and what basically not even decisions but like loyalty. And it kind of what cemented these members into this group so that they would basically do anything blindly for them. And so, to kind of go back to your question, also at the very beginning of our conversation, I think that you can kind of convince anybody to do anything by brainwashing them with this sense of power. And that can be a very dangerous thing.
100%. And that makes it make sense too, why this is all so relevant right now, I think, because we live in a world that like disempowers people at a very large scale, and people are going
Yes.
to look for solutions to that. So,
Exactly. And I think where you live and the community that you're a part of is critically important. And there's just so much isolation now. And, even in a connected society with social media or whatnot, I just think that amplifies it even more. And we really have to figure out how we're going to solve for this because it's just leading to more anger, more hate. And it also feels endless. Like, how are we going to figure this out? And so I think you do that by storytelling and by creating characters like this that allow people to connect with an experience that's very different from their own and understand it differently.
Yeah, I think again, like I'll keep this super broad so we don't spoil
Mhm.
it. But Wolf's journey is so interesting, because like your job as a writer is to not necessarily make your readers like empathize with somebody or approve of the things that they do, but to understand them at least a little bit.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm curious about like when you are, shaping not just Wolf's journey, but the dynamic with Flynn. How do you balance that sort of like, how do I put this?
I think I understand what you're asking because it is a very fine, it's like a dance between the two of them throughout the whole book. And I tried to use, it was very important for me to have a character like Flynn be the mirror for Wolf because she is essentially forcing him to think about his worldview differently and vice versa, right? Like Wolf is kind of forcing Flynn to think about her worldview differently. And so that's where this dance kind of comes into play, where they're constantly trying to figure the other one out. And for a character like Wolf, he is unafraid of pretty much everything, as we know at this point, and he kind of has nothing to lose. And so meeting Flynn is the first time I think he's met an adversary that he wasn't expecting and he doesn't know how to deal with. And I like that when I'm in my own imaginative world when I'm writing. I like exploring that. I like exploring that Flynn isn't, she's not your normal hero and he's not your normal villain. And I like being able to play with that in ways that, like I said, it's like I don't care if readers like them or they don't because I think that that's very nuanced and I think that it's going to kind of evolve and change. I like I said, being able to make readers think about things differently than they would have. That's my like goal. Hopefully, I'm not sounding too repetitive with that.
Oh, not at all. That's a really interesting insight. And like I think it plays to why their dynamic and their points of view can feel so authentic because like nobody is the villain of their own story, not knowingly.
Yes,
And so,
exactly.
unless you're like Iago, yeah, like you are not like a hand rubbing, like mustache twirling, like villain,
Yeah,
grounding your conflict not in like good and evil and black and white sort of narratives, but rather just like in opposing viewpoints, differing goals.
exactly. And at the same in the same vein, in a lot of my book clubs, when I go and speak to them, one of the questions that I always kind of try to pose and that I think is important to consider when reading this book is that, what is the responsibility of the community in creating these types of quote unquote villains or people who commit these acts of violence? Because there is a part that they play and there's a lot of individuals who end up getting, like we talked about, lost and ostracized and feeling alone and isolated. And so when we continue to deplete resources that help those people feel connected with others around them, this is the result of that. And so again, not to continue to defend Wolf, but like how much of a fault is it of his that he got seduced into this extremist organization? Because that's what's happening every day at this point. And it's our reality, and it will continue to happen if we don't find ways to connect these individuals back to what matters in their community.
Mhm. Absolutely. I think that is sort of like a side effect, perhaps, of like a society that puts so much influence on the individual that like
Yes,
we lose sight of
exactly.
our like obligations to each other and our communities. And yeah.
Exactly. You're exactly right. It does feel very individualistic. And, I live in a community where I feel very privileged every day. And it's very important for me to remind myself, like, this is not a reflection of the true America that's happening right now.
Mhm.
There's so many factors that go into it: schools, education, libraries, like everything.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really interesting way to think through so many issues that are like extremely relevant to the world that we live in right now that is changing
Yeah.
literally day by day. Yeah, thank you so much for coming to talk about it.
No, of course. My one of my very good friends, who she's been in my writers group for since I started this book, she always makes fun of me and is like, you're basically like, anything you write actually happens, so stop writing.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that what happens in the second book does not become our reality, but yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was such a great and enlightening discussion. I love it because I always learn something about my own characters and my stories.
Thank you so much. You did mention that you are working on something new, and since you're thinking it's
Yes.
true, can you tell us it's about like puppies or kittens or bunnies, right? Is that the next book?
No, total divergence from what I'm writing now. It's actually a children's book. No. It is actually a deviation away from the action-packed thriller that The Rising Order and The New Order is. It's more of like a juicy drama with kind of elements of psychological suspense, but it will be about golf wives. So it's kind of about wives of semi-professional golfers who are trying to become professional golfers in a golfing community, and what kind of happens there. I'm really excited about that one. I feel like it's a little bit more reflective of the life stage that I'm currently in, and it's fun. I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Oh, nice. Well, I look forward to the insight into another enclosed fringe community. That'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. It's different kind of infringement, but
Yeah. Thank you again for joining us. This has been great.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Okay, listeners, please check out The Rising Order Duology, the second volume. The New Order is available now. They're both available now, so check them both out if you haven't yet. You can head to your favorite independent bookstore or library or website. Do you have a favorite bookstore that you like to send people to?
Oh man, I have so many in the Indianapolis community. I would say I have a recommendation for any city that you might live in, because I've attended so many amazing ones. But it's not one, it's actually, we have in every March now, I think this is the third year we're coming up on. It's called the Indie Book Crawl. So it's like indie for like Indianapolis, and then an indie independent bookstore, and it is so much fun, Jen. They've had so many they have so many people come from like all over. Actually, I think now there's people coming in from out of state, and people go from like one bookstore to the other, and so you kind of get a chance to experience them all, and it's a blast. And I usually try to attend a bookstore at one of them and meet new readers and things like that. So check out the Indie Book Crawl in March of 2026. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. That is a fantastic recommendation.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, listeners, for joining us, and we will see you next time. It is now time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.